All of them! I swear, all of them!
I have never heard so much fucking God talk from one man in all my days!
Let him go.
No one on this island is allowed to say that word!
Did he say Cyclops? Did he hurt your feelings?
I don't like it when people call me that!
Oh, I didn't.
But you're so fat. I mean, big and strong. And you really do only have one eye.
My eye. Give it to me. Give it to me and I won't kill Marcos for having you steal it! Give it to me!
You want it? Go get it.
Hey guys, you got Crave here with a review of the base game of Assassin's Creed Odyssey in 2022. Let's get the TLDR section done, as I do in my other videos. I've always thought that the journey of Alexios or Kassandra was worthy of being in my personal top 20 list of all time, but after replaying it again, I'm tempted to move it up to top 15. But of course, not everything is roses in this game, so let's check it out as to why it's great in many parts and why it's also not good in some others. This is Ubisoft's interpretation of Greek mythology and how it ties into the Assassin's Creed franchise as a whole. The mythos has been done over and over in different media countless number of times, so it can be a pretty tricky thing if another media company attempts to use it again. On the gaming front, Ubisoft did it right with Odyssey, and while many aspects work thanks to Ubisoft's creativity with a tried and tested setting, it's Melisanthe Mahout and Michael Antonako's lending of their talents that really upped the story value of Odyssey. I played this when it first launched and chose Alexios, played by Michael, and had a blast being pretty much an unstoppable force in the Greek world. This year, I went with Kassandra, who is played by Melisanthe, and I was very surprised and that basically I enjoyed the experience as I normally play the male character given an option. We'll go over Kassandra's in-game appearance, but for now, let's just talk about the persona. Kassandra and Alexios' stories line up pretty much the same regardless of the character, with some minor differences, especially in the romantic subplots. Kassandra's voice acting is superb in Odyssey, and it really adds a lot of emotional depth when it applies in certain storylines. Now, when I say emotional, it also applies in the moments where she has to be this monstrous force against the very average soldiers and fighters in the Greek world. Without giving it away, Kassandra's heritage is special, which makes her quite the remarkable fighter, hunter, or assassin. Her humble upbringing and her troubled early life really ties nicely into the main plot. It can be subjective, but I found it to be very compelling, though the pacing can be rough in some areas due to the world format, which is almost always the case for, well, open world games, and the fact that it is a Ubisoft game with the Ubisoft formula. There are a lot of interesting side stories or side quests, but some of them feel like checklist items. Still, for a good amount of them, they're pretty good and actually made fun from a story perspective. I suppose if you're a Greek lore enthusiast, the developers' fantasy views of the stories are interesting versions. You're basically dropped in the middle of the Peloponnesian War, and you will meet a lot of interesting characters as described in the books you've probably read in school or seen in other media or games. Again, this is Ubisoft's take on things and how they want it aligned with the AC franchise. I vaguely remember higher levels of interest when I first played this, and somewhat had the same feeling this year. I suppose the familiarity did dampen the interest, but I can still say it's pretty good even though it's been 4 years. If you're like me in 2022, I chose to do fewer side quests as opposed to the launch year. Thank goodness for scaling options which allow you to progress the main story at the pace you want. My intention was really to go through the main story, and I like that it was focused on Kassandra's heritage. It really just explains very well why you're sort of a feared mercenary, but it doesn't turn you into this Superman-like being. I think the main story is worth close to about 40 hours of your time, and if you really just focus on that, it's going to be a really great experience. From a mechanics perspective, you will grow in power over time, but the story is more on really just unlocking what was really inside of you. As you learn more about your heritage and what has been passed down to you, you will see a growth in Kassandra's character as she aims to find what she has lost and act on those responsible. There are some interesting revelations, and there will be moments where the choices have to be made and some of them have to be difficult ones. Though you will carry the weight of the consequences, it doesn't really affect the world story. But Ubisoft seems to present it in an acceptable way, as the story of the Assassin's Order or the early years of the Brotherhood and its enemies have always been kept from the general population, so I guess it is fine in a certain sense. From a graphics perspective, this game does not disappoint in 2022. It still looks very good to this day. The landscapes, the open seas, and the overall ambiance looks great. There is a feel of a grand journey or adventure when you launch the game. Well, it feels like a small adventure when you start out in the Isle of Kefalonia. However, about an hour or maybe two of mucking around in that island, you know you're in for something special. The two main characters look great, and Ubisoft has taken some care in making sure they look impressive in a physical sense. I always thought that Alexios looked great, but Kassandra is quite an impressive looking mercenary as well. This is what I've always envisioned how a feared female lead would look like. She looks tough, in fact so strong looking that her feats in combat aren't all surprising. There is no disconnect in terms of her abilities in combat and its alignment from her physical appearance. As with my previous playthrough, I kept the very plain look for Kassandra like Alexios. Instead of garbing her in a Wonder Woman type of look or flashy looking steel armor, I went with simple cloth, and it's mainly because she just looks great. I mean, seeing those unflexed muscles in conversations, or even seeing her in combat is just really great to look at. Outside of Kassandra, the Greek world is really nice as I mentioned earlier. Does it get samey in some places? Yes, it does. More often than not, the places look pretty much the same, so visual variety isn't a rich feature in this game. Of course, there are locations that the style can vary quite a bit, like when you start to delve into areas that house some of the more fantastic or legendary creatures like the ones from the different Cyclops you encounter or the Medusa. There are areas where the art style dramatically changes. So there are those moments, but compared to the rest of the world, which also have NPC models that pretty much look alike at most of the time, they can feel very familiar. Assets are basically reused, and it isn't something uncommon when you have a game that uses the open world format. On a side note though, I haven't encountered a whole lot of visual bugs since the first time I played the game. Perhaps smaller patches were introduced since then to resolve them. In replaying Odyssey, it was really the story this time that kept me going and revisiting Ubisoft's interpretation of the old Greek world. During launch, gameplay was the main reason. Don't get me wrong, it's still fun, albeit repetitive. Now, the reformatting of the AC series from Origins made Odyssey an RPG-focused action/looter game. The looter aspect is great because you don't have to necessarily sell or dismantle your gear. You can keep upgrading them to match your level, or you can engrave items to make them stronger. I even keep some purple gear in my bag because sometimes they offer better stats compared to legendary ones or the yellow gear. And yes, stealth is an important part of the game, but one-hit assassinations aren't a thing all the time, at least until you invest in appropriate skills and gear modifiers. Assassin's Creed Valhalla was really just better in that sense. Now, for my current playthrough in Odyssey, I still played or approached the game via stealth, much like my first run. At least what's great about it though is that if you fancy your Greek merc to be a hunter or a warrior, you can do that as well, as it isn't made too difficult due to having less dependencies on allocating points to required talents. You can most of the time pick the talent or ability you want for your talents if you decide to reallocate them. There will be required talents to take, sure, like if you want to enhance your poison or fire damage, but that isn't the case for a majority of the talent or ability trees. In fact, when you get to max level, you can just basically reset everything, allocate ability points to those talents or skills you want, and then add points to your mastery levels. This often means increasing your damage or output at small increments specific to the damage type you want to enhance, so there is that flexibility. Oh, and you also have the option to save loadouts or gear sets if specific sets work better for certain situations. I never really bothered with it, but it is an option to equip more assassination-focused set of gear if that's what the sequence needs, or if you need to pick off beefier soldiers from afar, you might have a set of armor or weapons with better hunter-oriented stats, then switch back to your other set when needed. Again, this is great flexibility in terms of playstyle. In terms of combat, you also have ship mechanics to worry about, as some parts of the storyline eventually sort of force you into it. I remember enjoying it a whole lot in my first playthrough, but not so much this time around. Still, from a point of recollecting what was in memory, it was fun when I really invested in it. My ship was pretty much a monster at sea. I was basically just setting enemy ships ablaze here and there, or cleaving them in half. So if ship combat is a thing for you, I think Odyssey did some pretty nice things in this department. Motivation for combat is of course the story, but it eventually turns out to be loot and the associated benefits. From a story perspective, you are after a cult and its members. Hunting them down provides loot and allows you to upgrade your powerful artifact which you carry, which ties into being able to upgrade some of your talents or abilities. If you want to further your legend as a merc, you again get loot as you hunt fellow mercs, and you also gain benefits based on a tier system. It can result in price reductions of goods, improving your chances to loot better items, and basically gaining rewards all the way up to obtaining a rare mount. I like this particular loop because it ties into the story and it sort of ties into your job as a mercenary. The more you hunt means you advance the plot, your abilities, and your benefits as a sword for hire. The other activities in the game are also interesting, but it can be affected by your appreciation for an open world format and the formula structure it has. There is a main story to follow, sure, and you can actually beeline it, but there are also other interesting side stories which are good, but I think it may not be for everyone. I got about 95% completion when I first played the base game, which meant I kept looking for anything that could, be something to do or a fort to empty. For my recent run, I really didn't do all of the side stories except for the ones in memory which I thought were fun. So the main, or at least the non-main story parts of the game can get repetitive. It's not always the case, but some of these side quests are basically like the same things you can do all the time, like you kill off some people or you empty a fort to get the bonus experience. Again, it was addicting during my first outing, and if I wasn't focused on the main story at this time, I probably would be doing the same thing. I remember getting a kick out of increasing or upping my mastery levels because it made my assassination stronger or my hunter damage stronger as well. So the non-main plot items will highly depend on your enjoyment of the combat and the loop the game offers. I really enjoyed revisiting this game, and it reminded me of why I liked it a whole lot back then. At the moment, I also like it better than Valhalla. Maybe the setting added to my greater appreciation for Odyssey, but I can't ignore the fact that Alexios and Kassandra are really just great characters. The combat, while not providing those instant one-hit assassinations all the time, is really fun, and the loop it offers in terms of powering up your character can be addicting. Provided the open world and formulaic nature doesn't get to you, this will be a great game that you can spend a lot of time in. Thanks for watching, guys. Talk to you soon.